Joining me is Malcolm Davis. He worked for the Department of Defence, including its Strategic Policy Division, has been an academic lecturing in defence studies and is a senior analyst with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, specialising in China. Malcolm Davis, thank you so much again for your time. What do you make of these allegations? How serious is this?
Look, I think it is very serious. I think that the way to defeat Chinese political warfare against Australia is to turn the spotlight on it. And that's precisely what has happened with Wang Qishan and Bo Zhao, where we've had the opportunity to see exactly what the Chinese government is trying to do in terms of shaping the debate in this country through infiltration, through influence operations, and through direct destabilisation of our political system.
I don't think we've begun to even get close to the end of some of these attempts by China. In your estimation, though, how successful have they been in doing what you suggest is the aim, to change perceptions, to perhaps influence some of our policies towards China?
Look, I think it's too early to say they've been successful because this is a long-term battle. The Chinese are thinking in terms of struggle. They think in terms of, not in terms of war and peace as we do, but in terms of constant struggle, what they call unrestricted warfare. And what they're waging now is what's known as political warfare against Australia, whereby they're trying to shape the debate in this country and shape the minds of our policymakers. And the ultimate objective of that is to get us to end our alliance with the United States and realign with China. You've got to remember that China's overwhelming goal is a China century, a China dream, whereby China restores its place in the world as the leading superpower at the expense of the United States and its allies. And what it needs its neighbours to do, including Australia, is to acquiesce, and to borrow a phrase from Game of Thrones, to bend the knee to Beijing. And that's what they're trying to do. So it's early days yet in this struggle, and we're just in the opening stages of what is going to be a very long period of competition and tension and attempts by China to destabilise our country.
That's going to be a challenge for a Western democracy with a famously short attention span. There were actually two allegations that came out over the weekend, and you actually touched on them. Wang Liqiang, who says he was a Chinese intelligence operative, he's told the 9 newspapers he was willing to give details about his spying. The Chinese embassy has released a statement saying, no, Wang is just a convicted fraud, he's a nothing. How likely is it that the embassy is telling the truth here?
Well, of course, that's what they would say, wouldn't they? Look, I think the evidence suggests, based on analysis done by my colleague Alex Joske at ASPI, that the Chinese claims that Wang is a fraud and a con man simply don't add up. So it's a smokescreen put out by the Chinese embassy to try and dismiss and undermine Wang's statements. And I think we have to be aware of that and respond against that. So I don't believe the Chinese embassy and what they're saying about Wang.
Well, I think that if he really was a crook and on bail and all that kind of thing, why did they let him out of the country? That sounds highly unusual. The Prime Minister today said he found these allegations disturbing, but he did spend a lot of time saying, oh, well, look, the government and the security agencies, they're doing enough, they're on top of this. Do you get a sense of confidence about how well they understand the nature of what's going on?
Look, I think that in recent years we've become switched on to what China is doing. We are far more aware of what is happening. We are far more aware of the nature of Chinese political warfare and unrestricted warfare and what their aims and objectives are. And I think the entire national security and defence policy community in this country is focused far more on hostile foreign state infiltration and espionage than what it was even 5 years ago. So I do think that the government obviously is doing well to counter this. I'm not going to go into specifics because that would be inappropriate, but I do think that I would say that the Australian government is far more attentive and focused on this than they were 5 years ago.
Malcolm Davis, the pushback, there is a pushback to China. You've mentioned Australia getting switched on. Hong Kong. Now, the people there still, although the colonies now, the former British colonies now under Chinese government really, it does still retain democratic elections for its district councils with the local government. Yesterday, this was amazing, after months of protests against China's control, the pro-democracy candidates in this election got their best results. They've won control of at least 17 of the 18 councils. The biggest pro-Beijing party got absolutely smashed, and the turnout was a record, 71%. The previous one was under 50%. How do you read that result?
Look, I think it's a great result. I think that it's a huge win for the pro-democracy movement, the pro-freedom movement in Hong Kong, who are there literally risking their lives fighting for their freedom. And I think that Australia should loudly and strongly and visibly get behind the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement, because what these young people are doing is fighting for their freedom. They look at Xinjiang and they see over 1 million people in concentration camps in Xinjiang just for the crime of being a Muslim. And they look at that and they see their future if they succumb to Chinese Orwellian authoritarian rule. So, and the Hong Kong protesters are fighting for their freedom, and I think this win is a huge win for them and a huge setback for Beijing.
Absolutely, and I hope people now finally bury forever that lie that Chinese culture isn't amenable to democracy. It's a Western thing. Give people the chance, whether they're Chinese or whatever, they prefer their freedom. Malcolm Davis, thank you so much indeed for your time.